Thanks, Andrew, and thanks you all for being here. My name is Jeff St. John. I'm Director of News and Special Projects at Canary Media, and we are here to talk about the future of energy and climate in California, and I'm very happy to be here tonight with three people who know a lot about that. Thanks for sharing your time tonight. First, and to my left, California State Senator Nancy Skinner represents Senator Skinner represents the California's 9th state senatorial district, which includes Berkeley.
Which we're sitting in.
Yes, indeed. And I did not know this. You began your public service career in 1984 as the first and only student elected to the Berkeley City Council, so that's pretty cool. Senator Skinner currently serves as chair of the Senate Housing Committee and of the California Legislative Women's Caucus. She served 14 years in the legislature, including 8 years in the Senate and 6 in the Assembly. And Senator Skinner has written a lot of laws that we all know about. She's written laws to expand rooftop solar, speed the transition to zero emissions vehicles, boost efficiency of buildings and appliances, reform clean energy financing. One law in particular I spent a lot of time reporting on was AB 2514, the country's first state energy storage mandate, which is a pretty big deal. And in this, her final term, Senator Skinner has kept at it with two laws in particular of interest to us tonight. SB 59, which tasked the California Energy Commission to examine bidirectional charging, that is EVs at power homes and businesses, and SB 941, which calls on the state to take on the process of decarbonizing California's industrial sector. So thanks for joining us, Senator. Next, we have Mayor Eduardo Martinez. Mayor Martinez serves as the mayor of Richmond, California, to the north there, where he was elected in 2022 after serving 8 years on the city council. Eduardo retired from a long career as a teacher and educator before he entered politics with his focus on public safety, affordable housing, and environmental issues, and those are important in Richmond. Richmond is a diverse, multicultural city with a history of industrial development stretching back to some of the state's first oil refineries at the turn of the century, and the country's most productive shipyard complex during World War II. But obviously this industrial legacy leaves also its environmental harms and injustices. Richmond is home to more than 100 hazardous waste sites, and residents suffer from high rates of asthma and other health problems linked to pollution, and explosions and other accidents at the Chevron oil refinery are real and present threats to health and safety. In September of this year, Richmond won a $550 million settlement from Chevron in exchange for dropping a ballot measure that would have taxed every barrel of oil produced at the site. And Richmond has a plan to prepare the city for a future less dependent on fossil fuels. In other words, preparing for a just transition. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Mayor Martinez. And last but certainly not least, Sammy Roth is a climate columnist for the Los Angeles Times, California's premier daily newspaper, and he's a must-read in case y'all don't know that yet. Sammy writes the twice-weekly Boiling Point newsletter, where he examines complex and pressing state energy and environmental issues and takes state leaders to task when they fail to deal with those challenges. And his award-winning Repowering the West multimedia series explored the fraught relationships between developing clean energy and protecting the people and lands that risk harm from that development. It's an incredible series. Thank you for writing it, Sammy. And what I really like about the way you report is that you articulate the trade-offs required for communities and stakeholders to reach these compromises to allow this clean energy development to proceed. And you're also very clear about the human harms that will come if we fail to do so. And Sammy previously reported for the Desert Sun and USA Today, where he covered renewable energy and public lands. And thanks for being here as well, Sammy. So, we are here. What better group of people to talk about California's climate and energy past, present, and future? And let's face it, we really need to talk about how we're going to establish California's leadership and steadfastness on climate and energy policy, because Donald Trump will become president of the United States in January, and we have to prepare for that. So, Senator Skinner, let me ask you, we saw Andrew's slides and he covered the bases. So let's talk about where we're at right now. California's deployed more solar power, more battery storage, and more electric vehicles than any other state. As Andrew mentioned, we got over just 1,000 hours of nominal 100% clean energy on the CAISO grid during mild and sunny days over the course of this year. And we've done that without experiencing the electricity shortfalls and supply-demand imbalances that we've seen in past years, largely due to the roughly 10 gigawatts of energy storage capacity on the grid. Almost all of it deployed since the 2020 rolling blackouts, but I might note built on the energy storage mandate that you passed in 2010, enacted by the CPUC in 2013. And so we're not as clean as we want to be, but we're cleaner than a lot of people thought possible, right? And we're also ready to put this clean electricity to work. You know, fueling vehicles. We've got more EVs than any other state and the most aggressive clean car, clean truck, and clean fleets mandates in the country, and those mandates are being taken up by a growing number of states. This is going to be a challenge under the next administration. And California is taking on fossil fuel heating in buildings with building codes, air regulations, and creating markets, hopefully, to drive the supply and the demand for heat pumps and induction stoves and other appliances that are potentially going to help move the country if we can keep that on track. So, Senator Skinner, tell us, how did we do this? Where are we at right now? And what needs to happen next?
Our highest demand day, highest demand on the grid, was about a year ago, September. In the really, we've had a lot of high heat days since then, but we didn't have a prolonged number of days of over 100 degrees like we did that one September, and we had the highest demand days. And we were able to meet the need, the electricity need, with the renewables we have online. There was some peaker plants, fossil peaker plants used, but also our energy storage and demand management. So we focus a lot on our implementation of the renewable energy, and we're doing phenomenally there. But the cleanest watt is a megawatt, still, no matter what the generation is. And so we want to remember that we still want to get the most productivity out of each unit of electricity as possible, and that's through efficiency. And whether it's there's an interesting correlation. Please, glad my mentor was Art Rosenfeld, who was the person that led us to, so back in the 70s, there was the projection that California was going to need a power plant every 100 miles up and down our coast. So it was going to need some 20 new power plants within 5 years to meet its electricity demand. And people like Art Rosenfeld said, we've got to think out of the box. We shouldn't have to build all those power plants. What's using so much electricity? Why do we have this demand? And so he looked at appliances. And just the simple change in refrigerator appliance standards cut the need for those 20 power plants. Now, I don't have that moonshot yet for transmission, say, but part of why our rates are going so high is the cost of transmission. Yes, to really electrify, we're going to need more transmission, but we also need to figure out how not to need as much. What can we do to either make it more efficient, whether it's microgrids, virtual power plants, what have you. And again, I don't have that moonshot, but we got to figure that out. And then we also have to be a lot smarter about getting the most productivity out of every unit of electricity. And when I was talking to someone in the hallway, in the foyer, and there was an interesting, when Governor Brown was governor and we had the really worst drought, and we had a 25% mandate of water use reduction, and California met it. And there was a institute in Davis that was looking at electricity data and tracking it compared to the water use data. There was almost a 1-to-1 correlation in the drop in electricity use in California with the drop of water use, right? Without anybody putting any effort to reduce electricity use. So there's just a lot of things that we can do. We don't have to accept that rates just have to keep going, or that, yes, we need demand to increase because we want to electrify it, but we don't necessarily have to meet it with all of the electricity that's projected. So let's think out of the box.
Thanks. All right, so we're looking at how to do that, and I wonder, Sammy, if we can ask you a little bit about where we're falling short on kind of aiming toward that vision. Because for all its accomplishments, California has a lot of problems, and
No, we're fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. It's just the rest of the country
All right,
that's screwed
okay.
up. We're good.
Well, let me turn to the next panelist then.
Yeah.
We've taken some steps backward in the past couple of years. We've got a California Public Utilities Commission that has slashed the value of rooftop solar, made it harder for schools, farms, and multifamily buildings to offset high and rising utility bills with solar. And we've got in the face of a serious budget shortfall, some serious cuts to some of the programs that we're putting forward for households in general and low-income households in particular to move toward electrification and more efficiency. And of course, the CPUC and Governor Newsom are saying that we need to curb growing utility costs. And that's the justification for some of these steps, particularly on rooftop solar. And there's, I think, a serious question about the cost shift math that is being put forward about rooftop solar and its impact on rates in general. In fact, utility costs are rising for a lot of reasons, including the fundamental fact that regulated utilities make a regulated profit for every dollar they spend building things, and so they have a natural incentive to seek capital solutions rather than others. You all know this, right? And let's be clear, a lot of utility investments are necessary. We need to reduce the threat of wildfires. We need to build the grids we're going to need to electrify all these vehicles and buildings. But rising electricity costs are also a direct threat to meeting those goals. Andrew stole my thunder here, but we can see how the vig between EVs and ICE vehicles starts to disappear. And this is particularly harmful for those who are least able to afford this transition. So, Sammy, you've written a lot about these issues. I don't want to belabor the point. Why are we where we are right now on this? Where are we on rate reform and utility cost containment? What is holding us up?
Well, I know we're going to delve into the cost question a little more deeply later, probably, but I think that in terms of where California is at on climate change and why we seem to be either sliding back or not making as much progress as we should be on climate and clean energy, there are a few reasons for that. And I mean, cost is the electric cost question is a big one and a big part of it. I think that the politics of climate and clean energy are just unfortunately getting harder, and I think there are a few reasons for it. And yeah, cost is a big one. I think for a long time there was a narrative, and I think overall this narrative is still true, that transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy is going to save everyone a lot of money and create a lot of jobs, because ultimately renewables are cheaper and more efficient, and and that's even before you account for the huge societal benefits and all of the just implicit costs that we just kind of shrug our shoulders and ignore most of the time, of climate disasters and air pollution from fossil fuels and all of that. And that still holds, but up until now we've sort of been able to, I think, coast a little bit on massive cost declines in solar PV, and the fact that wind was pretty cheap to begin with and still got cheaper, and that batteries following the same cost curve as solar, helped by bills like Senator Skinner's, the battery mandate in California from 2013, and EVs as a result coming down in cost as well. And that's gotten us pretty far, but again, the politics are getting harder. So one, yeah, the electric rate issue is a big part of it, and we'll get into the various reasons electricity costs are getting so bad in California. You just alluded to a bunch of them, but that makes electrification harder. It makes getting people onto EVs and onto electric heating and cooking harder, and impedes all of these other parts of decarbonization. I mean, climate change itself is making this harder as well, because worse heat waves, people are using more air conditioning, people are not going to just want to or be able to use as much electricity, because it just it breaks the bank. That gets into a related issue, which is sort of some of these sort of cultural and hot button sort of, how do you describe it? Just these sort of culture war type issues where, it becomes this, well, do you want to switch from a gas stove to an electric stove? Well, in some cases, that might be fine in your household or your restaurant, and in some cases, you really might legitimately not want to do that, and in some cases, you might have been led to believe by Fox News or misinformation on social media that you don't want to do that, and same issue with an electric car. Maybe you really can't, maybe you need the range of a gas vehicle right now, maybe you could afford an electric car and could do the range. Maybe you couldn't, maybe you've been led to believe you can't. These are just becoming impediments in a way that they weren't before once you get past the early adopters of people who could afford EVs and cared about climate change or the environment and really wanted to do that. So one, cost; two, sort of consumer adoption and, culture war type issues. I think three, the political power dynamics of utilities and the fossil fuel industry are becoming more real in a way that they weren't before. You alluded to rooftop solar and the, cuts to net metering and cuts to just the affordability of rooftop. That's the utility industry that's been phenomenally successful in California, and the utility workers unions, IBEW and others, and having their way. They have enormous political clout in California and have for a long time. I think you see the fossil fuel industry now, even in very blue California, they see the success that's been had, and it's real for them in a way that it wasn't before. I mean, I think that I saw that between, oh gosh, I forget which trade group it was, but between the various oil companies and the trade group, that they just spent a record amount in just the first, WISPA, thank you, Western States Petroleum Association, just in the first 9 months of 2024 alone broke the record for the most amount they've spent lobbying in California in any given year. So, the fact that the policies the state's passing to try to phase out oil and gas drilling and move away from refining. I mean, that's just it's getting real. So you're creating these new political obstacles. I'll just list two more and then let you move the conversation along. Yeah, that's five. So that's three. Land use. You referenced that series I wrote, Repowering the West, about the transition to renewable energy in different landscapes in the West. We're just building so much solar and wind now, and these large transmission lines to move around the solar and wind. When you were building a few projects here and there in the desert and in these, rural landscapes, that was one thing. There's just so much of it getting built now that there's just opposition cropping up everywhere. Some of it you might want to call illegitimate, some of it you might be more sympathetic to. The reality is, almost everywhere you try to build one of these large infrastructure projects, whether it's conservationists on a landscape that they say deserves protecting, whether it's Native American tribes, whether it's a rural community that sees this as industrializing their hometown, it's very hard to find a good spot to build this stuff that somebody's not going to try to fight you on it, especially as more and more of this stuff gets built. That's real in a way that it wasn't before. And fortunately for you, I'm forgetting the fifth one. So I just think that, I do remember now, I apologize.
Okay.
Senator Skinner was saying before that, we've sort of, because of all the batteries that have gotten built, we have gotten to this point where we don't have to, quite have the same, worry about blackouts that we did a couple of years ago. And that's absolutely true. But as you also said, we are still dependent on this, gas peaker fleet, right? Even with the, all of the 10,000 plus megawatts of batteries we've deployed. I think we're getting to a point even on the electric grid, which is now nearly 60%, renewable plus carbon-free nuclear, hydro, et cetera, in California, where, we have to start having this conversation about, how do we start closing down some of these gas peakers if we're really going to get to that 100% renewable goal. So that just gets harder. You have to start talking about, long-duration energy storage, advanced geothermal, maybe doing advanced nuclear. What does it look like? Again, it gets harder, it gets more expensive, it starts getting into never-ending PUC dockets and who pays for it. These are problems that didn't exist before when it was just build a lot of cheap solar PV and, some more wind and some more batteries. These problems didn't exist before.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those 5 points, and let's hit them all in order as we go through the rest of the evening, see how many we get to.
I promise not to talk so much again.
No, this is great. You laid it all out. And here's the thing. This is all very important, and several of your points pointed to a serious challenge that we're facing. Affordability and the pressures being placed on people. It's making it difficult, I think, to carry out California's commitment to climate justice and, climate equity, right? 1 in 5 households in California are struggling to pay their energy bills. That's according to the nonprofit Greenlining Institute. Communities that are bearing the health and safety and economic burdens of living near refineries, near gas power plants, near major trucking and shipping hubs, are suffering the health harms of the fossil fuel dependence that we all rely on to get the things we need to live. And, these decisions on rooftop and community solar at the CPUC in particular have made it more difficult to look at alternatives to the large, utility scale infrastructure that is also difficult to build and site. And it's made it more difficult to deal with particular problems. There's a chain of gas power plants along the Southern California coastline that were supposed to close in 2020, I believe, and they are still open and being paid to stay open because we cannot relieve the demands for power in in that pocket of the grid. And it also doesn't seem to me necessarily the state has really clarified how it's planning to support a just transition for all the people who are going to face disruptions, serious disruptions to their livelihood, as we reduce our need for these polluting industries. I was at an event 2 weeks ago, it seems hard to remember that far back, where there was someone from the Berkeley Labor Center talking about the experience of workers. I believe it was at the Marathon refinery that closed down several years ago, and how they, several years after that closure, were seriously underemployed. I mean, they weren't able to find jobs that were commensurate with the same kind of jobs they used to have, and they were not happy about it. And we need to figure out a way to make this just transition happen. We can't really leave that out of the equation. And so this is what I want to ask you, Mayor Martinez. So you and your fellow Richmond residents are on the front lines of these struggles. And can you talk about how you are planning to deal with them, what difficulties you're facing, what roadblocks, how the state is making it more difficult, how the state is possibly helping, and what needs to happen for this to work in your community?
Yeah, one of the major issues when there's a carbon tax, the money is collected and it ends up going to administration and meted out to various organizations, and it rarely makes it to the frontline communities where the money absolutely should be spent. So even though we have real active organizations in the city of Richmond, like APEN, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, and CBE, Communities for a Better Environment, and the Richmond Progressive Alliance, even though we have these organizations working for a just transition, it's hard to get past the votes of people who are influenced by WISPA. WISPA has a major influence at the upper levels. So even when we had the green, what's it called? It's the green. There was a green zone. Let's see. Anyway. Even when that was organized, Richmond wasn't even considered as part of the zone, and we had to advocate to put Richmond into it. So it takes a lot of activity from residents advocating to make things happen. There's a lot of toxic sites that need to be cleaned up, and it's always about money. That costs too much to clean it up. We'll just cap it and have people live over it, and if the cap breaks and people live there, then we'll worry about that when it happens. We'll find some solution when and if it happens, but we know that it's going to, because it's on an earthquake zone at along the shoreline where liquefaction is going to happen. As an elementary school teacher, the majority of my students had asthma. And I did not know that they had asthma, and I thought they were slacking on me. I thought, come on, guys, you can do better than that. And then when I had conversations with the parents, I realized, it actually is a ailment that's caused by the environment that's created by Chevron. And then Chevron likes to push it off on trucks and cars, but if you think about it, those trucks and cars are operating on the product that Chevron created. So it's actually Chevron at a different level. So it all comes down to the petrochemical situation. So I think the solution that I would like to see is microgrids. I think that when we think of energy as a commodity, we end up with problems. In fact, at peak energy production, Marin Clean Energy has to pay CAISO in order to put their energy onto the grid. So it's almost as if you have to pay for producing too much energy. How does that help anyone? If we had microgrids with batteries where it could be stored, then we wouldn't have that problem. I know that the Pittsburgh Unified School District has their own microgrid. I took a tour and saw all of these solar panels that they have, and they have a gigantic area full of batteries where they store the energy. So for public safety, I think it would be essential for all public buildings to do the same thing.
Yeah. And thanks. By the way, y'all definitely want to check out the Richmond virtual power plant project that Marin Clean or MCE is putting together. It's pretty cool, renovating abandoned houses and equipping them with a lot of electric stuff. Thanks for inviting me to that, by the way. But all of this requires, I think, us to talk about the cost of electricity, right? What do we do about electricity affordability? And this is an open-ended question. I would invite all of you to jump in as you see fit and bounce off each other, because I don't know if I know I don't have the answer, and I don't know if we'll come to the conclusion of what the answer is tonight. But let's talk about electricity affordability and how it informs energy transition and climate policy right now. And not to jump ahead, but maybe we could ask the seemingly nonsensical question: if clean energy is so cheap, how come electricity is getting so expensive?
I don't know, Jeff, why?
Because it costs money to build the stuff that delivers it. Well, no, that's not it. Okay, Sammy, right back at you.
No. You just answered the question. Senator Skinner, how about you?
So if you live in one of our municipal utility districts, so you live in Sacramento area, SMUD, if that's your utility, or, well, SMUD is our best example, I think, but your electricity rates are lower than at PG&E or Southern California Edison. And part of that is under California's rules, our investor-owned utilities are guaranteed a return on their investment. And, their profits right now are higher than they've been in a long time. So is that purely because of the approval of the PUC on rates, or is there, anyway, there's a lot of factors. Some of it is stock prices and such. But that's one I think that we need to look at is, there's a difference, it seems to me, between a return on investment and some highest profits ever. It's one issue. Another issue is the wildfire costs. We have allowed the ratepayers to assume covering a lot of the consequences of the wildfires and then the work that needs to be done for resiliency. And if we didn't, then they would be put somewhere else. Whether they, I mean, it's not going to ever be free. So where is the appropriate place? I don't have an answer for that, but certainly that is contributing to especially our PG&E rates. And I think I opened with, some thoughts on ways that we might address how to get it down, but I don't have the moonshot for it. But it certainly is one of our biggest challenges and has to be the focus, not just of the legislature, because really the legislature, well, we can adopt things, but we're not really the experts on how to do that. We need, our different research institutes, our agencies and such to help us figure it out, but it's a very serious challenge.
Do you mind if I co-op you here, municipally co-op you, and ask another question of Senator Skinner, Jeff? I hope you don't mind, Senator. The cost shift issue with rooftop solar. I mean, there are economists who will swear to their grave that that it exists and that it's not everything, but that it's real and a part of what's going on with rates. And there are other economists who will swear to their graves that it's not real and nothing to do with it and no effect whatsoever. I'm sure you've spent time studying this. What do you think?
Well, I will say that well, I've certainly been following the issue. I wouldn't say that I have gone into the weeds on these different studies, but I have, it has kind of struck me that a lot of the economists who show the most serious cost shift, in other words, that everybody with rooftop solar is getting this huge subsidy and everybody else is paying for it. Under the first net metering, yes, there's a subsidy, and yes, others paid for it. But whether, what the proportionality of it, and most of the studies, not all, that will prove to their grave that it's serious and real, and we've got to stop these subsidies to rich people, and only rich people have rooftop solar, have been some, the correlation between where those research institutes get their funding and what their results are is, you could question that.
I'd like to interrupt and say that the problem I have with economists is that they pay attention to the cost of commodities and not the cost to communities. There's a major cost that the communities end up eating and suffering with. When there's all this pollution, they end up getting cancer, they end up getting other illnesses, and they don't have the money to pay for the health that they deserve, the health care that they deserve. So these are costs that are eaten up by the state. Insurance companies are reneging on the benefits that people have paid to get, and they do that so that they can get their profits to their shareholders. Like PG&E, gets their profits to the shareholders. Like Chevron gets their profits to the shareholders, and everyone else ends up paying for it. I think these things need to be. The utilities should be state-run and never privatized. Because if you look at utilities after they're privatized, you can see that the prices go up and that the people don't get the same services that they want to. Look at Texas. When they privatized Texas, the prices went up 4 times during the 4 times as much during privatization than they did when it wasn't privatized, and then they started failing when they had the freeze, and people couldn't afford to heat their own homes, and they had to put on extra jackets and all sorts of things. But it's not only in Texas; it's worldwide. I have some figures. When deregulation and privatization of electric utilities happened in Chile, the price went up 166%. In Canada, 72%. Czech Republic, 133%. Ireland, 100%. And it goes on and on and on, where people make profits on the miseries of people who can't afford to buy stock.
I appreciate that. I feel obligated to step in on the behalf of privatization as a force of forcing innovation, but I don't want to hold myself to it. Let me just say that I'm going to say that there is I think, a debate which I am in no way expert in, that perhaps the efficiency of a state-run versus privatized entity is dependent perhaps on the incentive structures as well as the kind of, the diligence of the regulatory apparatus that is in place to manage a privatized utility that basically has a profit motive that encourages it to go out and do better. And I guess we have SMUD and we have LADWP, and we have different opportunities there. The reason I bring that up is because I am really struggling to figure out how we as a state structure the incentives and the regulatory frameworks that are suitable for the energy future that we're heading toward, right?
Well,
yeah.
There's, we did an experiment, state of California, I was not in the legislature at the time, to open up the markets for our electricity. And it went badly. And Ron and others really gamed it.
Wait, when was that?
When was that? Anyway, so, but there are people who are very, who I respect and who are, not, that I respect, that look at, we look now at our system and there is no, PG&E and SC&E and SDG, they don't have any competition. And so has that benefited? I would like to be in a different, potentially a different situation, but we're in a capitalist system. And when you set up, it's a private market and yet no competition, then it is easier for that market to have more control over prices, even though we have a regulatory structure. So that's a factor that we have to rethink. And then we have to look at the transmission, for example. Maybe allowing for opening up competition in the transmission space and allowing entities to bid on that new transmission, maybe that can help bring down some of the projected price of the transmission that we're going to need. But I think we do really have to think out of the box, because how we are doing it exactly now is not helping us in terms of knowing that we have to increase our demand on electricity, but how we do it without just causing rates to just skyrocket.
Does anyone else on the panel, and I've heard this idea suggested before, or even just brought it up myself, and usually people just laugh and say, oh, that's a nice idea, but it'll never happen. Do any of you think it would be a good idea or at all possible to just take large chunks of what's currently in electric rates and just start paying for it out of the general fund of the budget rather than putting it in rates?
In rates. Well, this is like it's kind of like the rooftop solar debate. If the without, say, a home battery, without a system in your house where you're literally can function off the grid or function without having to put demand on, there is still an infrastructure, a distribution and other system that has to be paid for. So there's always some level of something that has to be paid for. And rates right now are what we pay for, how we do it. But if we were to shift, say, some level of this over to the state's general fund, you still have to pay for it. So then what will be your new revenue source to cover it, or what will you not pay for that is paid for by the general fund? So those are all the kinds of debates you have to
But
have.
wouldn't it be less regressive if it was in the general fund, which is paid for largely by people who are taxed more, which are wealthier people, and not out of
Well,
electric bills?
our general fund is dominantly, but not only, from our income tax rates, and California does have very progressive income tax rates, but we don't generate enough revenue to fully take on that cost without cutting something significant. So California's budget's huge, but there's not that much of it that's discretionary, and it is the general fund that's discretionary. And those discretionary portions cover things, a lot of things like different of our safety net and such like that. And we still have this is just a very unfortunate kind of irony in that these rates are hurting our lower income people most, though we do still have a subsidy for lowest income electricity users. But we also have high rates of poverty, and it is our safety net that provides, benefits to those people with high levels of poverty. So again, what do we shift in terms of the general fund? And I can say all this because I was budget chair for 3 years. Right now, we were in a deficit last 2 years, but revenues are up because of the stock exchange. So maybe, I won't be in the legislature, but maybe the legislature won't have as much challenge in this upcoming year.
Okay, my next pitch, massive PUC reform. No, I don't, I kind of said that for applause, but seriously though, Mayor Martinez, you're talking about replacing, the IOUs with municipally run utilities, and I guess the reason I wasn't responding to that before is because in theory, that is an idea that makes sense, especially in the context of talking about SMUD and talking about, lower rates at municipal utilities. And in practice, isn't there, what was the story? Does one of you remember the exact details? Because I'm going to mangle this. Wasn't there a municipal utility in Ukiah or Roseville or somewhere that spent 50 or 60 years trying to get out of PG&E? Does someone remember? Oh, was that the SMUD origins? But there was some other one that... Okay, someone's saying it out there, NPCA or NCPA. I guess I struggle with the idea that there's especially with the climate timelines that we're dealing with, that even if it's not a 1.5C pathway of 43% emissions cuts by 2030, which probably isn't happening anyway, or 60% by 2035, that with anything that looks remotely, feasible to have a civilization in, that we're going to wrest control away from the investor-owned utilities. So that's why I'm, to say, okay, if you can't necessarily get that, the PUC, a lot of these problems we're talking about feel like they come back to, okay, that's lost in a docket somewhere at the PUC because the legislature and the governor didn't want to deal with it, and the under-budgeted, understaffed PUC is slowly working its way through and is probably not going to come up with an especially innovative solution. So I don't know, I just wonder, is there any appetite anywhere to deal with, making the PUC work better, which seems like it would help. Anyway, that's just throwing that out there for shot. Jeff, if you have more questions, ask us.
Let's table that
Yeah.
for future discussions, because I realize that it's getting kind of late, and I don't want to cut this short. I think that's a very important subject, and let's keep working on it. But I also want to bring up...
Someone else can work on it. I'm not going to do that. Yeah.
Let's bring up the elephant in the room right now, which is, the change in government that is to come.
Trump.
Yeah, thank you. And right now, I wonder, given, Donald Trump is going to be president, whether you all feel that this is a time for California to to rally around what it has right now, and how we deal with the problems that we've identified, while we also defend that which we've already gotten. But I also want to bring up that, in this election, there's a general sense that people are losing faith in our collective ability to solve our common woes. The cost of housing, the cost of living, the income inequality, and climate and the environment. And how do we as a state build on the climate technology and the climate policy to build a solution set that builds us up from the ground up, from the communities up, while also holding the line on what we've got. And I don't know if we can make this our final question or roundabout here, because it's a big one, and I don't know what the answer is, but.
Well, I think change starts at the local level. When we do things at the local level, it's easier to manage because it's a smaller group of people, and you can get everyone on board. And when that change happens, you can export that change to other cities, other communities around you. And then eventually it starts snowballing and growing into an effort that the state level, the county level can't ignore. Richmond was one of the first cities to become a sanctuary city, and then other cities became sanctuary cities. We were the first city to pass a resolution supporting Gaza, and after we did that, other cities started doing that. We were the first city to, we tried to pass a sugar tax, but the state government passed a law that made it impossible for us to do that, but other cities did that.
Yes, Berkeley was one of the first to adopt a soda tax, and we just renewed it on the ballot a few days ago.
Right. And then we just made an agreement with Chevron so that Chevron will give us. Pay us $550 million over 10 years, $50 million for the first 5 years, $60 million for the next 5 years. And it was so that we wouldn't put an initiative on the ballot. And so when we did it, I told other communities, you can do this too. We need to hold polluters accountable. And we do that at the local level. And, they might be able to fight one lawsuit, but when there's cities all across the country doing it, then it's multiple lawsuits. And, Chevron paid attention to us.
But Mayor Martinez makes a good point in terms you gave the example of the Pittsburgh school district and how they, in effect, have done their own microgrid. And, years ago when cities were faced with the insurance crisis where insurers would not provide insurance to cities because of the deep pocket, anybody sue a city and they get a lot of money. So cities pooled together and created their own insurance pool. Now, when I say this, I'm not saying, hey, the state should just step back and let cities solve it. But cities they can play a role in, they operate, their own municipal operations could play a role in doing something like the Pittsburgh
Correct.
School District did. And when they look at the cost for them, the rates that cost, by doing so, then they pull off the demand on the grid, which then, of course, could help potentially bring rates down. Because why are rates going up? Rates are going up, we've talked about many, many reasons, whether it's we are covering wildfire costs because we're covering this, that, or the other thing, but also because of the projected need for more transmission, more distribution, more other infrastructure that is based on the projection for what demand's going to grow. Well, if we bring that demand down, if we still electrify but bring that demand down, then we potentially, that's one strategy for reducing rates. So there is a role communities can play in this, and our CCAs. When I say our CCAs, I mean our community choice aggregators. And I would like to see them be a lot more bold and innovative, because they really had to fight to get to exist. The utilities completely opposed the establishment of them. So now they exist, they're protected, so, let's get real bold.
Sammy, do you have any last words for us?
I guess just one last thing would be, we're going to have a governor's race in California in 2026, and this will sound like an obvious thing to say in a room full of climate nerds, but just be sure to keep climate top of mind when you're figuring out who to vote for. it's going to be really tempting with the insanity at the federal level in the next 2 years to just go choose a candidate based on whoever looks and sounds the best in terms of what they say about Trump, but that's not the most important or even the only thing. Not only keep climate top of mind, but go annoy your friends and family about it constantly to keep that in mind when voting for governor. I do it all the time. They put up with it. They'll do it for you too. Yeah, that's all.
I would like to say that Trump being president puts a lot of question into the offshore wind industry, whether or not it will come to fruition in California, especially since Trump loves us so much.
That's true. The leases have been let, I guess, I don't know, we'll have to figure that out. We don't know
Yeah, let's
yet.
do offshore wind next. Let's do it.
Yeah. Sounds good. Senator Skinner, any final words?
Trump is, he tried the last time to remove California's waiver for clean air, which is what allows us to have the cleanest vehicle fleet in the country. We sued him, and so I think we initiated, the state of California, over 100 lawsuits in the first couple years of Trump's. And now, the courts are different. We got a lot more challenges with this, with his current administration. It would appear that he's not going to have too many people to moderate him. And even if the lawsuits ultimately aren't successful, courts don't often move fast. So it is still worth it for California to initiate a lot of lawsuits on many of the things he tries to do to roll back in California. And that's the reason the governor called the special session, which will start in the day that the new legislature, the newly configured legislature, will get sworn in on December 2nd. They might not take any actions on December 2nd, but they will early in January. And it'll be a lot budgetary actions to shore up the different agencies and our Attorney General's office to be able to be prepared to do that kind of litigation.
Thank you. I believe we are out of time, but Senator Skinner, Mayor Martinez, Sammy Roth, thank you very much. Thanks you all for having us.